Good morning, everyone, and thank you all for joining us for today's presentation. My name is Marissa with Legal Aid of North Carolina's Helpline. Today, we have Carlton and Hatali presenting for us some information on school enrollment issues after disasters. If at any point during their presentation you have questions, you can put them in the Q&A box on Zoom or the comment section on Facebook. We'll review all questions put in the chat boxes throughout the presentation. Please remember that this is a public forum and legal aid is not representing you at this time. So be sure to keep your questions as general as possible, as we cannot provide any legal advice specific to your individual situation. With all that being said, I'm going to pass it over to our presenters to get us started.
Thank you, Marissa. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Hatali. I use she, her pronouns. I'm here with my colleague, Carlton, and we are staff attorneys with Legal Aid's Right to Education project. And we are excited to spend a little bit of time talking to you this morning about school enrollment during a disaster or crisis situation. And for our Spanish-speaking folks out there, the presentation will be in English, but we have Spanish text on all of our slides, and we'll also give you some information on how to access our online resources in Spanish. Para los miembros de la audiencia que hablan español, la presentación va a ser en inglés, pero tenemos traducción en español en toda la presentación y también vamos a ofrecer información sobre cómo accesar nuestros recursos en español. Marissa gave some of this background, but just in case you didn't catch it, Legal Aid of North Carolina is a statewide organization that provides free civil legal services to our North Carolinians across the state. And the Right to Education project is our education justice project. So we're fighting for education justice across the state, for an end to the school to prison pipeline, and working with students and families to try to make sure that they are getting an access to a safe and sound basic education like they are guaranteed under our state's laws and under our state constitution. And again, this presentation does not mean that we represent you. The purpose of this presentation is to give you some legal information and not advice. But I want to reiterate what Marissa said, that we are happy to take questions along the way. You can put them in the Zoom chat, you can put them on Facebook, and she'll be taking a look at them as we go along, so she can pause us if you have any questions about what we're sharing. And we're hoping today to provide you with some information and resources that help you advocate for your child in a K-12 public school setting in North Carolina. That does include charter schools. So anything that we talk about today applies to regular public schools and to charter schools. And just our agenda really quickly, we're going to start out by talking about how does enrollment usually work? What are the provisions in state law that determine whether a student can or can't enroll in a particular school, or where they are eligible to go to school, just to give you some background. And then we're going to talk about what are the specific protections that kick in for families who are experiencing a disaster situation or a crisis situation. So we are recording and giving this presentation a couple of weeks after Hurricane Helene has really devastated our western counties in North Carolina. So it's certainly relevant to you if you've been affected by Hurricane Helene, but this information broadly applies to disaster and crisis situations. And the last thing we'll do is we'll share a couple of resources that you can hopefully use in the future and as you walk away from this presentation. One that we want to highlight in particular is we have a flyer that summarizes some of the information that we're going to talk about today, and we can go over that flyer at the end of this presentation if we have time. If you just want to get to it yourself right now, you can scan the QR code that's at the bottom of the screen, and it will take you to a list of links, and the very top link says, flyer for issues related to Hurricane Helene. So that's a pretty good summary of what we are going to talk about today. So with that, I will give it over to Carlton to talk a little bit about enrollment.
Good morning. I am Carlton Powell. I'm an attorney with Legal Aid's Right to Education Project, and I will be talking to you briefly about school enrollment in the state. Go to the next one. Thanks, Atali. So, North Carolina General Statute 115C 366 lays out what the state law says about eligibility for students in North Carolina. It doesn't have this language about the age minimum being 5 years old. That's not in the statute, but that is the minimum. So as Tali mentioned, students in North Carolina, children in North Carolina do have a right to attend school, to receive an education under our state constitution. There are some caveats to that potentially, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but state law also kind of lays out the eligibility requirements. That is 115C 366 if you want to look it up. But that law says specifically that students under the age of 21 and above the age, doesn't say above the age of 5, but again, that's the law, above the age of 5 are eligible to attend school, enroll in the school. They can have been awarded a diploma. They've been awarded a diploma. They don't have to be enrolled. The student does have to live within the zone, their district attendance zone, or what that simply means is that you have a base school, your child has a base school that they're entitled to attend. If they want to attend a school in a different attendance zone, transfer schools, usually they have to go through a transferal process. What we're going to be talking about a little bit now in a few minutes is that when a disaster strikes, the transfer process changes a little bit. And Natalia's going to go into that in a minute. But when there is no disaster, and there is no other compelling reason to force a child to attend school elsewhere, they have to attend it at their base school. And if they have not been convicted of a felony in adult court, and so this is a disaster relief presentation, but for those who are interested, children who have been convicted in adult court may be denied enrollment in school. So that does not mean if they've been adjudicated delinquent in family court or juvenile court, excuse me. But if they've been convicted of a felony in an adult court, they can be denied enrollment. Same goes for if they've been suspended or expelled. A school district can deny them enrollment in their school if they've been suspended or expelled. When the enrollment process begins, a school can seek documentation from you, from the parent, to prove the child's age, obviously, because we talked about age limitations. They may need to know the child's residence, where the child lives, because the child's residence determines what base school they attend, obviously. And they can ask for immunization verification or documentation. But they cannot do so in a way that discriminates against non-citizen students. And so we put this together. I think we have this up in English. If you'd like it translated, now you may not be able to understand me if you need it translated, but for those who are speaking Spanish, we have a code up here for you to scan. And so that you can have access to this information. But basically, this is what we talked about just a minute ago, that there might be some documentation that's asked of you. This is some of what it is. So obviously, to prove a child's age, you might be asked for a birth certificate. If you're asked for, you might be asked for a social security number. You might be asked for a proof of residence. And I suppose, you know, if you've just been made victim of a natural disaster, you might not have access to these things. And so if you don't have access to a birth certificate, a social security number, or proof of residence, like I don't know, a utility bill or something like that, what you can do is potentially go to your school, your child's school, call your child's school, email your child's school, and ask that school to supply that information to whatever new school you'll be transferring your child to. Every school obviously maintains their students' records, and in those records is the documentation that you provided when you originally enrolled your child. So if you've lost that documentation due to the disaster and you want to enroll your child in the districts elsewhere, and the district asks you for this documentation, one alternative you can use if you don't possess that documentation is to ask your previous school to supply that information. And hopefully they should have access to it because a lot of this is digitized. If it's not digitized, hopefully it's in a file somewhere and that is still accessible. But those are options you have. I suppose if you have to prove parentage, you can use a DNA test. There is an affidavit of parentage that you could use, and the affidavit is notarized. You swear under oath that you're the parent. You can also use what's called a caregiver affidavit to kind of explain who you are or swear to your being a provider for the child and living at a certain place. So affidavits are good ways of proving who you are if necessary. And again, those are notarized, so you have to find a place to get them notarized. A school, we've talked about, a school cannot request information about your child's immigration status. US status is not an enrollment requirement, so you don't have to provide the school with documentation about that. And a school can't require that documentation. But these other documents, they can request them, and if you can provide them, again, if you can't, these are some methods that you can use to get access to that information.
And I think Marissa is going to drop in the chat and on Facebook the link to the page on our website that has this chart. And for our Spanish-speaking families, puede accesar a nuestro sitio web escaneando este código QR. Y también quiero señalar que el sitio web se puede traducir al español para ver este gráfico y otros materiales. Cuando vaya al sitio web, haga clic en la pestaña en la esquina inferior izquierda que dice inglés y elija español en su lugar y se puede ver todos esos materiales. So if you're following along on Facebook or if you're in the chat, I think Marissa's dropped the link for this, where this chart is on our website, and you can also scan the QR code to get to our website materials. Okay, so now that we've talked a little bit about how enrollment usually works, I'm going to spend a moment starting us out on what specific protections are there for students in a disaster or crisis situation related to enrollment. And the two sort of key takeaways that we want you to have here, the first is that the main protection for students experiencing displacement due to a disaster is what's called the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. It's often just referred to as McKinney-Vento or even MKV, someone's writing or typing, and that's a federal law that protects the school stability of homeless youth. And we'll get into what does it mean to be a homeless youth. And a little bit of background on this law, when it was passed, kind of the beginning parts of it that talk about why does this law need to exist? What is it meant to accomplish? It states, every state educational agency shall ensure that each child of a homeless individual and each homeless youth has equal access to the same free and appropriate public education, including a public preschool education as provided to other children and youth. Homelessness is not a sufficient reason to separate students from the mainstream school environment, and homeless children and youth should have access to the education and other services that such children and youth need to ensure that they have an opportunity to meet the same challenging state academic standards to which all students are held. So the driving force behind McKinney-Vento is really to make sure that in this moment of destabilization of home life, whatever caused it, school is something that a child can continue to access and can continue to access in a successful way. And it really puts a strong mandate on schools to take extra efforts and go to extra lengths to make sure that a child's living situation doesn't negatively affect their ability to still get to school, have that safe and stable location, access their education, make progress in the curriculum, and feel just like any other kid at school, not feel differentiated or excluded or treated differently in some way. It's a really powerful law. And as we go along, we might share some things with you that you're surprised of, like, oh, really? The school has to do that? And the answer is yes. It's a really strong protection for students who've been displaced. And the other piece to kind of keep in mind as we're talking through these different things is that if domicile changes, so if where your family plans to live permanently changes, then the state law provisions that Carlton just shared are the things that apply in terms of your student being able to enroll in a new school district. So most of what we're going to talk about today is if you're experiencing a disaster, you've been displaced for some reason, and you have an intent to return to your disaster affected home, but for the time being, maybe you can't be there, you're somewhere else, or your child is somewhere else, and they still need to be in school. So who is protected under McKinney-Vento? And I will get into this very large paragraph, but I think our main takeaway, if you're watching this and you are someone who has been affected by Hurricane Helene and you have had to leave, or your living situation is not what it was before due to Helene, you are one of the kinds of students or families that this act is thinking about. So there shouldn't be too many questions about whether this applies to you if you've been affected by Hurricane Helene, but we'll talk through it anyway. So homeless youth, as defined by McKinney-Vento, are youth who lacked a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. And this is pretty broad. So even if you are, say, living with family or sharing doubled up housing because of the disaster that happened, even if you're staying in like a shelter or a hotel, you might think, oh, like, well, we have somewhere to stay, so we're not really homeless. But the point is that doesn't meet that criteria of fixed, regular, and adequate. Regular kind of implies that, like, that's where you want to be, that's going to be a sustainable solution for long term. And that's not the case with these different kinds of temporary housing situations. So those are some of the most common examples. Shelters, hotels, living with family or friends, doubled up, all of those types of living situations are not fixed, regular, and adequate under the definition of the act. And so your child would qualify as a homeless youth. One additional piece to keep in mind is that sometimes it may be that you and your child are in different places. So you might be, still maybe at your home, and you sent your child somewhere else, maybe to friends or family. And in that situation, they still fall under the protections of McKinney-Vento. They're just named slightly differently. In that case, they're an unaccompanied youth. So they still meet that criteria. They're not living in a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence if they're like with family or friends, or they're somewhere that's temporary. But they're not in your physical custody, that they're not with you at the time. That makes them an unaccompanied youth. Either way, whether they're a homeless youth because you've all had to go somewhere temporarily, or they're an unaccompanied youth because they're just on their own somewhere temporarily, they're still protected by McKinney-Vento. And so these are some of the key rights that the law provides to homeless youth, as we've just talked about, as they're being defined. The first is immediate enrollment. So if a child, or you as their parent, you come to a school and say, my child is eligible for enrollment under McKinney-Vento, we've been displaced, we're here temporarily, they are to be immediately enrolled in school. So what Carlton was talking about in terms of needing paperwork and those sorts of things, the school can't say to you, well, we need to wait until you get this stuff from your old school or something like that. They have to immediately enroll your child. They can ask you to provide those things and to start working on that. But in the meantime, they have to enroll you, even if you don't have those proof of residency or immunization or age documents, even if that student is an unaccompanied youth. So if you've had to send them somewhere temporarily and you're not with them, but someone brings them to the school to say, hey, this student is here temporarily, they need to be enrolled, they have to be enrolled. Or if the school disputes their eligibility for some reason, and we'll talk about what you do in that situation. Again, if you've been displaced due to Hurricane Helene, we really hope that this is not coming up. Folks should really be taking you at your word that this is what's happened. But if the school, for some reason, disputes that that child's eligible to be enrolled under McKinney-Vento, they still have to immediately enroll them. It's a enroll first, ask questions later protection. And again, this is to minimize disruption for the kid and to minimize the amount of time that they're not in school and not getting an education. The second is a best interest assignment. So generally under McKinney-Vento, a child is enrolled either in the school district that is geographically associated with wherever they're living temporarily, or in their old school, in the school that they were in prior to becoming homeless. In a disaster situation, usually it's going to be situation number one, right? Usually the reason that students have become homeless or become displaced is that maybe, their school's not even open yet, or there's not water or that kind of a thing. So probably what the only option they're going to have is the school wherever they are temporarily. But in other situations, the school, the child has a right to go to school where it is in their best interest to go to school. And if that means that, they've become temporarily homeless and they're living in a shelter that has like a different assignment area, but it's in their best interest, it's determined to be in their best interest to actually get to stay at their old school, then that's where they get to stay. And the child's preference is really heavily taken into consideration in deciding where is the best interest for a child to be enrolled. Transportation. So transportation has to be provided for homeless youth, even if they're living outside the district's attendance zones. Again, this may not be as relevant in terms of disaster situations. It may be that you are within like the bus routes for a school anyway, wherever you're staying temporarily, but your child is entitled to get on that bus, even though you are, you've not like been at that school since the beginning of the school year. They have to get transportation to get to school. That only applies for the school day. So the school does not necessarily have to provide special transportation for extracurriculars and things like that, but they have to provide transportation to and from for the school day. The fourth one is equal access. So students who are homeless and in a school as a homeless youth have the right to participate in school just like any other student. So they can't be put in like a separate program or class. They should be getting the same services that they were getting at their old school. So if they got special education services, if they got free or reduced lunch, anything like that. And if there's things that they need to participate in activities in the school or to participate fully in the curriculum, like a uniform or supplies or a Chromebook, anything like that, then they should be getting that just like any other student at the school. Appeal rights. So if a school disputes that a child is eligible to be enrolled in a particular school, there's a process that has to be followed, and students and their guardians have the right to appeal that decision, both eligibility at all and then like what placement they end up getting. So what best interest assignment they end up getting. So every school district has a McKinney-Vento coordinator, and that's where the first level of appeal goes. And there's also a state coordinator. So in any school, if you're enrolling your child and there's some kind of dispute, again, the first thing that they should do is enroll your child. And then the next thing they should do, if they're saying that there's some question or dispute about eligibility is they should give you a copy of what your appeal rights are. So what's the process? What's the timeline? What do you need to do in order to appeal the decision? And throughout that appeal process, no matter how long it takes, the child gets to stay enrolled in school while it plays out. The last right is confidentiality. So a student's status as a homeless youth is a part of their confidential record. It is protected under FERPA, or the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. And so obviously, the school will need to make arrangements for things like transportation or adding a student to classes or all of that kind of a thing. But it is not something that should just be like thrown around, that, oh, this child is homeless, or has been displaced or whatever. That information should really only be shared with people who need to know it. It's not something that the whole school community should be made aware of. And again, in terms of figuring out how to like access all of these rights and what are the specifics, every district has one person whose job it is to be the McKinney-Vento coordinator, to be in charge of working with any student who's enrolled in the district under McKinney-Vento, who comes to the district and says, hey, I think I'm eligible to be enrolled under McKinney-Vento. And it's their job to support youth and families in navigating this whole process. So what should you do if you have been displaced by Helene and you are somewhere else in the state and you are trying to get your kids enrolled in school? The first thing to do is just make that ask for immediate enrollment. You can go to like a school or a central office. We always encourage following up any phone or in-person requests with an email, something in writing, just to make very clear what you're asking. And any of these people, so a principal at a local school, a school counselor, or a school social worker, any of these people should know what the process is and how to get you plugged in. If you are not sure who to go to, or you're not sure how to find that person, you're not sure like which is the right school that your child should be enrolled at based on where you're temporarily living, the best person to contact is the district McKinney-Vento coordinator. And that information should be pretty readily available on the district's website, or you should be able to call and get that person's information. But if you have any difficulty, the North Carolina Homeless Education Project is the state entity that oversees all protections and programs for students and families experiencing homelessness. And they have a list that's always up to date on their website of the McKinney-Vento coordinator for every district in the state. So you can also go there. And again, if you are denied for whatever reason, if you're told we don't think that your child is eligible to enroll here, first of all, your child should still be immediately enrolled. You are presenting to the school and saying, I believe we're eligible under McKinney-Vento. We're residing here temporarily. We're homeless. Your child should be enrolled. That should be it. But if the school then says to you, we think there's a question about eligibility, ask for documentation, ask for any decision or any anything that they're saying to you, ask for a copy of it in writing, and ask for the appeal procedures in writing so that you know what are the timelines and the deadlines that you need to be meeting and what you need to be doing. At that point, we would also encourage you to call legal aid if you need support with that, and there'll be information later on about how to call legal aid.
All right, just to follow up a little bit on that, we also encourage parents to take action themselves, and that's kind of what Atali was talking about. We encourage you to reach out to us. We'll reach out to the school if we can, but a lot of this you can do yourself. And what you just need to know is what the law says, and Atali just laid that out for you. I would encourage you to reach out to the McKinney-Vento coordinator, explain the situation, and fight as best you can to explain why your child deserves to be in that school, and refer to as much law as possible. That's all we're going to do. But then if they still don't let your child in, obviously you should reach out to us and we can get involved. What we're also going to talk about is what happens if you're denied enrollment, and because maybe, for example, your child is living with an aunt or an uncle in another county, Wake County, for example, and for whatever reason, the school isn't considering the child eligible for protection under McKinney-Vento, let's just say, for example. So we're just going to talk about some other steps you can take if necessary to get your child enrolled in school. And this really aligns with the McKinney-Vento Act. It is a state law. It's 115C366 again, but it's just a state method, a state enacted method of guaranteeing children who are suffering some housing instability, a method of getting them into school. These criteria don't just include children who have suffered a disaster, a natural disaster, but it also, as you'll see, guarantees children who are the children of a lost parent, the children of an incarcerated parent, just children who may be experiencing some housing instability for different reasons, ways of getting in school. So what the state essentially says is that guardians or caregivers can take some kind of action. And then in that action specifically here is completing a caregiver affidavit. Again, an affidavit is a sworn statement requiring a notary. So you'd have to get it notarized, but it's an action whereby you can provide a caregiver affidavit to the school district to show that, or not you maybe, or an aunt or an uncle, whomever the child is living with, can provide this caregiver affidavit to the school district saying that this child is domiciled with them, with the caregiver, and that this child should be able to attend the school where the caregiver lives. So the child is no longer living with the parent potentially in that child's original residence or permanent residence, but the child is now living somewhere else. And for some reason, the school district is not allowing that child to enroll in that caregiver's school district or base school. So what options does that caregiver have? And this is that option. It's the caregiver affidavit. And so we'll show you a little bit about it. It does include children who are victims of natural disasters as well, just like McKinney-Vento does. So you really should not run into this problem, but we're just providing this information just in case you do. And this is what a caregiver affidavit looks like. It's a 2-page form. You can find it online very easily. You can type into your search engine, North Carolina caregiver affidavit. Go wherever you can to print it out if necessary, and print it out. And there you see, I won't go over everything with you. You can read it for yourself. You can find it. It's very easy to find. It's a PDF. Print it out, fill it out. Make sure you check all the boxes that are relevant to you. Sometimes I've seen caregivers just check one box. You need to check all the boxes to apply. So in this case, obviously, the student's home is lost or uninhabitable, as a result of a natural disaster, could be one of the boxes that are checked. And if any others need to be checked, check those off as well. You get it signed in front of a notary, and then you'll supply it to the school. Go to the next one, Tom. So yeah, there's an appeal process as well for this. So it's very similar to McKinney-Vento. So if the school district refuses to enroll your child or the child who's, living with a caregiver and trying to attend school where the caregiver is domiciled, there is an appeal policy. This policy is laid out in the school board education policy on the school board's website, the state school board's website. It's not contained in 115C366A2. The statute, that subsection of the statute just lays out what state legislature has deemed required. And the state legislature says that unaccompanied youth or the caregiver can apply to the state board essentially to appeal any denial of enrollment. So there's got to be an appeal process where there's a denial of enrollment of a student who's living with a caregiver. So if that child's living with an aunt or uncle or family member or grandparent and the school district is denying enrollment, first, as Natalia has said, the school should allow that child to be enrolled while the dispute process is ongoing. But there is a process by which you can challenge the denial of enrollment. And so this is, we'll go into the next slide that kind of lays out what the process is. I think the next slide lays out what the process is. Yeah, just a little bit. It's a lot of words here. I won't go over each one of them, but essentially you will initiate the dispute resolution process with a local liaison. And the local liaison could be someone at the school district. It could be essentially a McKinney-Vento coordinator. But essentially what you'll have first is a process by which you can appeal the denial at the local district level. And at that level, the local liaison must carry out that appeal process within 15 school days or 30 calendar days, whichever is less, of the denial. And you should receive some written notice of that denial. We cut out some of the words so we can fit them on the page. But while that resolution process is pending, the student must be allowed enrollment in the school that the student is attempting to enroll in. So while the child is living with the grandparent, the child is trying to get into the school is saying, no, you can't attend here. Then you want to challenge that enrollment. The school needs to let that child attend that school while the dispute resolution process is underway. Again, that is to protect the child's education and the stability of that child's education. The impetus here is to get children educated, is to give children access to schools and not to keep them out. That's the default. Education is the default. Denial of an education has to be something that is litigated or fought about or resolved. But excuse me. So anyway, if a school determines that, or the district determines that during this dispute resolution process that the child is not entitled to enrollment in that school, then there's another step the parent can take, or the caregiver or whomever, and that is they can reach out to the state coordinator. Who that will be is probably why you might want to reach out to a lawyer, but a lot of this information is accessible. You can Google it. You just have to kind of work through the kind of the searches, but this information is available online. But and we should have it available on our website. But what you want to do is that's the next step, is to appeal to the State Board of Education, the state coordinator, to challenge the local district's decision or denial of enrollment. And then there will be a process there. And hopefully that person will determine that your child should be able to attend school in the caregiver's district. And then obviously, if you have problems at this point, please reach out to legal aid and we can assist you.
Right, so we just kind of want to recap what we've talked about thus far. And the kind of bottom line is that if you've been affected by Hurricane Helene and you've had to relocate, either you and your child or just your child should be eligible for enrollment in school wherever they have had to relocate to through the McKinney-Vento protections. You don't need to provide any affidavit or proof or particular information. You should, or whoever the child is with, should just be able to take them to the local school, public school district, and get them enrolled. So start there. In rare circumstances, if there's some kind of issue, another option that you can explore that is available to you under state law, if a child's with a caregiver who is elsewhere, and the reason that they are there is because your home is no longer habitable due to the natural disaster, then you might also be able to explore a caregiver affidavit as an option. But the hope is that the very basic protection that exists here, which is McKinney-Vento, is going to be something that any district in this state, regardless of where you end up having to go and for how long, any district should recognize and should be pretty readily willing to work with you and your child. We all know how hard this disaster has been on our communities and families across the state. And so it shouldn't Shouldn't be a big question. You should be able to see a McKinney-Vento coordinator and get your child. But if you have any kind of issue or question, or if you are just trying to learn more about this, I said that we kind of focused on McKinney-Vento as it applies to disaster and natural disaster, but if you remember that slide that defined what a homeless youth is, there can be any number of reasons that happens, whether it's due to loss of housing, like eviction, whether it's due to having to flee domestic violence. There's so many reasons that the McKinney-Vento protections can apply. And so if you are looking for more information related to some other type of crisis situation, not just a natural disaster, we really encourage you to check out this page on our website. Marissa has very kindly just dropped it in the chat. I think she's also going to put it on Facebook in the comments. This is some of the information that we have up on our website of, any kind of issues that you might run into related to enrollment. It goes into that information about documentation and what the school can and can't require. It goes into what happens with students who are living apart from their parents. That's more about caregiver affidavits. It talks about all the rights that we've talked about in this presentation related to students experiencing homelessness. And some of those things that Carlton talked about at the very beginning of the reasons under state law that a child may be denied enrollment. So if they are under a long-term suspension or an expulsion, or if they have been court involved in some way, there's also more information here about what you can do in those situations and what your options are to still try to get your child enrolled in school. So we encourage you to take a look at this. You can get there through the legal aid website. You can also, once again, scan this QR code, and there's a number of different links that are at that QR code. The first is a flyer that kind of summarizes what we've talked about here. And I think, Marissa, unless there's a bunch of questions, we should have time to just kind of look at it really quickly. There's that flyer, and then there's a link to our website. And there's also a link there for how to contact legal aid. If something that you've heard here today is ringing alarm bells for you, or you believe that you need legal support related to enrolling your child in school, there's information there about how you get in touch with legal aid to get help with that. So that's what we have. Marissa, I don't know if there's questions right now, and if not, I'll show that flyer.
So right now there are no questions. If you have questions, once again, you can put them in the Q&A box on Zoom or the comment section on Facebook, but I think you can go ahead and show the flyer.
Just a second to get it pulled up. Carlton, feel free to hop in at any point, but this is the information that's linked in this flyer. So, it talks about what McKinney-Vento is, who qualifies as a student, who's homeless or unaccompanied under McKinney-Vento, and what are kind of the basic rights that we talked about. Again, immediate enrollment. That's one of the biggest ones. Is there's kind of no ifs, ands, or buts. The idea is that your kid should get to go to school as soon as possible. And making sure that the school that they're assigned is in their best interest, making sure that they get transportation. And our suggestions for, how to get your child enrolled. The McKinney-Vento coordinator is always the best place to go if you have any questions at all. And this handout actually has the McKinney-Vento coordinators for every district that's been impacted by Helene. Now, the sort of funny thing about this is that if you have gone somewhere else in the state because you've been impacted by Helene, you may be in a county that's not listed here. So you can do one of two things. You can go to the North Carolina Homeless Education Project that we mentioned, pull up their list of McKinney-Vento coordinators, Or you could contact the McKinney Evento Coordinator for your home district and say, hey, we are in X county and we want to try to get enrolled here, and they should be able to give you information for the colleague who can help you with that. So that's all our McKinney Evento Coordinators. We didn't go into this very much, but there's some information here just related to, you know, if you have not left, if you have stayed, some of our schools out west are just starting to open up again, right? Last week, this week, that kind of a thing. And there's some flexibility that schools have for how many days have to get made up if they're closed. But it's likely that there will be some flexibility granted because of Helene and how long schools had to be closed. So you should definitely hear from your school, and if not, you know, it's definitely worth asking about like what they anticipate happening because of the number of days that were missed. Do they anticipate that the last day of school is going to have to get moved at all, or if there's like any days that are going to get added, or if things are just kind of gonna proceed as normal. And the last thing that's on here, which again we didn't talk about a bunch, but we just want to acknowledge that this is really hard, right? This is really challenging. This kind of displacement can be really, really challenging for everyone, and students are included in that, and particularly our younger students. There are any number of ways that a kid can get support in school if they are having a hard time adjusting, if they're experiencing trauma and that's resulting in like difficulty concentrating or mental health issues or mood changes or anything like that. So we really just encourage you to reach out to school staff, reach out to your child's teacher, reach out to counselors, reach out to the school social worker and say, hey, this is what I'm seeing going on with my child. You know, what resources do we have? What options do we have to try to support them? And it may be that they could qualify for particular kinds of supports through the school to help them be able to continue to access their education in the best way possible. And that's really the goal with all of these things, is to give every student the best shot to be able to take good advantage of their education that they're being provided in school.
I just want to jump in, Natalia, and to say as well that if the child has a 504 or an IEP, that 504 and IEP follow that child to whatever school they attend. You don't have to fight about it. That's the law. So I just want to make that clear. If you have problems, we have all kinds of resources on our website that you can use to address those problems, but it's indisputable that those plans follow the child wherever they go to school.
And if there's an issue of like you don't have a physical or an email copy of those plans, like you know that your child has a 504 plan or they have an IEP, but you just don't have it with you, we absolutely encourage, one, what Carlton said, you know, reaching out to your homeschool district to ask them to provide that copy to you, and then also provide it to the school that your child's being enrolled in. But if you're having trouble with that, you know, all of these things more or less at this point should live in an online system that's called ECATS, that the state agency that supports with special education services, the Department of Public Instruction, or DPI, also has access to. So if there's really an issue for some reason, then we would also encourage you to reach out to DPI and say, hey, I need this documentation for my kid and my old school is having a hard time providing it. Is there anything that you can do to help me?
All right, well, I am not seeing any questions in the chat about anything that was discussed, so I'm going to go ahead and say thank you everyone for joining us, with a special thanks to Hatali and Carlton for presenting. If you would like to review anything that they talked about, we have posted a recording of today's event to our Facebook. It will be immediately available following the presentation. You can access this recording with or without a Facebook account at www.legalaidnc. Thank you all so much, and I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.
Thank you.